Good afternoon, everyone. It's a beautiful spring afternoon here in North London. It seems like the perfect time to be talking about the history of gardening. And this is the second in our series of webinars on the history of gardening. And today we are absolutely delighted to be focusing on a really key topic, which is going to be relevant for so many classrooms, especially those who teach the history of medicine, but also people who are kind of interested in kind of connecting their students to the natural world. And we're going to focus today, as I said, with the history of gardening. We've got a really packed program ahead for us. We're going to start with a little look at the sources which we shared with you just before today's session. And we're going to invite you to type into the chat box and put up some of your suggestions around how you might use some of these sources in your history classroom with your primary teachers or secondary teachers, or just thinking about how you might use these resources generally. So we invite you to participate with us and share some of your ideas. And leading that session is going to be two good friends of mine, Barbara Trapani and Debbie Bogard, who have thought very carefully about these sources which they're going to share with us. And it connects to the British Library exhibition at Unearthed, where we draw our name for these webinars. After that, we're going to go into a film which Dr Natasha Hodgson has prepared for us around the connection between the medieval world and gardening, looking at the role of women in particular. Natasha, at the moment, is hot on her heels, running through a Spanish airport to try to get to her hotel in time to join us later on today. So fingers crossed she'll be available for a Q&A at some point over the next hour. And once we've gone through the film, we're going to look at the work from our teacher practitioners who are going to share some of the resources. Salma, specifically, who's worked with Natasha, will talk to the secondary classroom, and Katrina, who's a primary educator, teacher trainer in Dublin, is going to focus on how she's worked with natural, traditional Irish indigenous herbal remedies and the work that she's done with oral histories from young people and in the 1930s, I believe. We're going to finish off with a very different kind of historical approach to gardening, and we'll talk to Paula Ogan-Hector, who's going to tell us about the tapestry that she is currently creating on that kind of theme. So without further ado, I'm going to bring on to the stage Debbie and Barbara first of all, and I'm going to share on our screen the sources that we've been looking at, and maybe Debbie or Barbara will talk a little bit to what we are seeing here while we're waiting for some comments. So this is going to go up on the screen. I'm going to jump off now. You two, you've got about 6-7 minutes or so just to kind of like share your thoughts on this.
Hi. Hello. So as Dan said, we're going to start with two of the sources that were displayed at the Unheard exhibition at the British Library. And these are some of the sources that really made us curious and attracted our attention and made us find out more. We shared them beforehand, so as we talk, if you would like to share in the chat how you use them if you would use them in your lesson, if you've seen them before, if you like them, or any other comment, that'd be amazing. So the first one is, both of them are herbals. The first one is a medieval herbal. In fact, is the oldest surviving illustrated Anglo-Saxon herbal. I particularly liked it for a number of reasons. Of course, a herbal is a collection of botanical drawing with instruction about how to use them in medicine. And it this source links very much with the first presentation we're going to hear in a moment, and in the connection between nature, the natural world, and well-being and medicine. One of the reasons why I like this source is because, as you can see in the little description, it has herbs and plant from around the Mediterranean, highlighting the movement and the connection in the medieval world of ideas about plants and properties, which also links to our previous webinar looking at the movement of plants. Dan, can you move us on to the next source, please? The second source that Debbie and I choose is a later one, is an 18th century herbal. It's also a herbal, but it's different because in the meantime, between the two herbals, global exploration have widened the scope. And so this particular herbal includes plants discovered in the New World, not just around the Mediterranean anymore. And also what interested us from this particular herbal was that it was collected and drawn and written by a woman, which also very much connects with the topic of today and some of the presentation that we'll hear about later on. So these were the two sources that we choose to kickstart, and if you had a chance to look at them beforehand, and if you would like to share your impressions or your ideas or your potential uses in the chat box, you can do it now, or you can do it throughout the session as well.
Thank you. I'm just going to jump in and say, yeah, please do, Barbara, thank you. And also, if anyone's got any thoughts, or like you say, throughout the session, it'll be really interesting to hear them. I was just so happy that Barbara got in touch with me. We met each other at SHP last summer, and the Gardens exhibition Unearthed was on. And so we met up in August just to talk about what we liked about the exhibition. We went round and sort of dreamt this up. So it's just been so delightful being able to do this. And similarly, Salma, who's going to be presenting shortly, that really came out of a collaboration with the exhibition before that at the BL, which was on medieval women, that Natasha was doing some amazing work on. So anything that you throw in the chat could well become another series of webinars over the next year, or a couple of conferences, or it's just been so exciting seeing things roll. And so I'm just really enthused by how one small source or item or something can just really land and go in like a range of different ways in the classroom. So just really excited about today's webinar and hearing both from Natasha shortly, and then how just amazing practitioners are using it in their practice and thinking about how we can do the same. So yeah, just a big welcome, and really looking forward to what's coming up next.
Okay, I think we've probably got some shy lurkers watching us with us, rather than people wanting to just share their thoughts at the moment, and that's totally fine. Maybe what we'll do is we'll find a little bit of time later on as well if people want to kind of reflect on some of the presentations or Natasha's short film in a minute, then we'll do that. So I'm going to take you guys off the screen now, and then we're going to go straight into Natasha's presentation. Thank you both for joining us for this first part. I'm going to take this off the stage as well. So what we're going to do now, as I said, is we're going to go straight into the presentation that Natasha has prepared for us. So she is, as by means of introduction, she is a historian at University of Nottingham Trent, and she has specialised in medieval history with a focus particularly on the experience of women in the Middle Ages. And she's also the co-founder of an organisation called Teaching Medieval Women. And as Debbie mentioned, SHP did a fantastic in-house workshop with them last year at British Library. So she's always got some very, very important things to say. And there's no point me carrying on. Let's hear her presentation now.
Hi, my name's Natasha Hodgson and I'm an Associate Professor at Nottingham Trent University. I'm really thrilled to be here today, so thanks Dan for asking me, to talk about some objects and texts from not one but two British Library exhibitions that I think can help us to understand better medieval approaches to women's health and medicine, as well as thinking about the garden, both in conceptual and practical terms. I'm also here because I'm a co-founder of the Teaching Medieval Women project, so I'll say a few words about that. The Teaching Medieval Women project began in 2022 at a CPD day that was organised for teachers on the subject of the Crusades, but we had teachers in the room, exam boards in the room, and what emerged from the conversation was this clear challenge that teachers were facing. They were struggling to include women's history in their classrooms for a variety of reasons. In response, we formed a collaborative group of academics, educators, teacher trainers to try and support the inclusion of medieval women in the secondary education. We run CPD sessions, workshops, give school talks, but the main thing is to co-create our resources with teachers. We source new materials and then teachers guide us on what works in the classroom, what's age appropriate, how it fits into schemes of work, and the teachers also help refine materials that we produce and share their ideas and schemes via our website. And the long-term goal essentially is to influence the curriculum change. So fingers crossed, the curriculum assessment review will make some waves here. But at the moment we've focused on medieval period where there's a big gap, and also we're focusing on Key Stage 3 because there's more flexibility there. I think TMW actually owe a great deal to our involvement in the Medieval Women in Their Own Words exhibition. I was fortunate enough to be an advisor on the exhibition and contributed to the exhibition book, Medieval Women, Voices and Visions. It's very handy for teachers. But it was a really popular exhibition with over 65,000 visitors, great keynote talks and events, a really great A-level day with the School's History Project, of course, and one of my PhD students, Kate Arnold, came and performed on the hammered dulcimer. But the main thing we were doing was organising school visits and CPD sessions for teachers, and obviously with the help of Debbie Bogard and her team as well. So these included guided tours of the exhibition followed by workshops where we could discuss our objects with teachers and develop the materials which we then put on the website. And it was great to see Salma and her students from Regent's High, so I'm very excited to see how they're getting on now. The focus of the Regent's High Day was really to introduce them to some elements of the exhibition which dealt with women's private lives, their bodies, healthcare and remedies. As I remember, they were about to embark on their GCSE studies, so they were going to be doing a medicine through time module, of which I think there are a few out there. So the purpose of the talk really was to try and get them engaged with some women's issues in relation to medicine. Now, the further back we go in time, the harder it becomes to reconstruct medical practices and illnesses. We're always limited by how well events are documented and what survived. Even so, the medieval period does offer a surprisingly wide range of sources: ecclesiastical records, hospital archives, household accounts, wills, coroners' rolls, saints' lives, medical recipes and herbals. We can always use illustrations and even archaeological evidence such as medicinal gardens. So taken together, these give us quite a rich set of materials for understanding medieval health and healthcare. But the sources come with challenges. For instance, I rather like this one. This is the image shown here that circulated online for years as a depiction of the Black Death because of the large swellings on the figures. But because it had been taken out of context, they hadn't realised that this was actually the 6th biblical plague of Egypt from the Toggenburg Bible of 1411. So there's this danger of what we call icono-misdiagnosis, which I think is a great word, which is basically where you misinterpret an image as being something else because it looks familiar. And similar, that can work with text too. So the description of symptoms, the depiction of symptoms in images might not necessarily correspond to a disease or an illness that we know today. So we always have to be a little bit careful with what we're looking at. Another major challenge is that women were often involved in point of care practice, so the sort of everyday forms of treatment, caregiving, domestic healing, but these were much less often documented than some of the other ones. So it makes their contributions harder to trace. So it's only really by widening the lens, looking at women as patients, carers and paid practitioners that we can begin to see the breadth of their involvement. And we need to look at different types of source material to do that. To give some concrete evidence for the medical roles medieval women played, we can turn to a range of administrative and legal records. So here we've got some poll tax returns, barber surgeon guild records, court rolls, and we see women working as midwives, barber surgeons, their apprentices, and physicians. We also find women identified as medics in other contexts. So we have 3 siblings here involved in a property transfer, and all of them are described as practicing medicine. Another case comes from Worcestershire, where Marjorie the Leech told someone off for throwing her into a river. So these are quite tangential examples, but it shows that there are a range of women involved in all of these different healthcare practices. We can also think about women as patients. Images of the female body in medical texts are actually quite rare, as the default was to show men. But following Galen and Aristotle, the female body was perceived to be biologically inferior, cold and phlegmatic, intrinsically weak, sometimes an incomplete male. And they were predisposed to disease, so perhaps likely to be less healthy. On the left here, we've got Disease Woman, who was in the British Library exhibition. She's fantastic. She's from the 15th century Welcome Apocalypse. And she's shown as pregnant, playing into these stereotypes of pregnancy being the main health concern for women, or the only female health condition. By comparison, male illnesses were portrayed in a number of different images or forms. I particularly love this guy, Wound Man, above. He's had a really bad day. So this is sort of showing all of the different ways in which you could be stabbed or injured in battle, for example, and then potentially how to deal with those problems. Now, when we think of medieval women in medicine, most of us do tend to think about midwives, wet nurses, and there are clear social and cultural reasons why women's involvement in women's medical care was socially acceptable and indeed necessary, at least in part because of secrecy cultures, cultures of shame, and concerns about sexual misconduct, potential sexual misconduct relating to women's bodies, menstruation and pregnancy. So I think this is illustrated here quite nicely in another text that was in the exhibition, the 15th century Sickness of Women, written for a female audience who might be too embarrassed to tell a male physician about their ailments. Interestingly, in the image here, there's another text where you have a woman checking the breasts of a wet nurse to tell whether she was going to be a good wet nurse, which obviously wouldn't be very appropriate for a man. I also wanted to emphasise that medicine wasn't the only treatment for illness. People did take great care to think about religion and spirituality and almost the sort of psychological benefits of prayer in a health situation. Particularly for women, pregnancy and childbirth were dangerous times, and comfort could be offered in the form of, here we've got a ring depicting St Margaret of Antioch, who's the patron saint of childbirth. And this is one of the objects that the kids at the exhibition really loved, the birthing girdle, which was made of paper, this one, but it's something that would have actually been worn during childbirth, but it's covered in prayers. It's been rubbed in particular places where, so it's had sort of skin contact, and the big diamond shape there is representing the wound of Christ. So people are invited to think about, Christ's suffering while going through childbirth. Now, it'd be impossible to do anything on women in medicine without mentioning Trota of Salerno. She's a key female practitioner of medicine and midwife in southern Italy in the 12th century. The Trotula itself is a compendium of 3 different books. One is a kind of more traditional theory book. The second is on treatments for women, so women's remedies, and the third is on women's cosmetics. And it's thought that Trota of Salerno herself was only really involved in the writing of the second book, and possibly she was dictating it to the author. But it's circulated very widely. The one in the exhibition was an English copy from the 13th century, so clearly there was a demand for the knowledge that the Trotula contained. In terms of the contents of the Trotula, we see specific remedies for specific illnesses. Particularly here, we've got one for difficulty in childbirth. She needs to bathe in water in which mallow, fenugreek, linseed, and barley have been cooked. She needs to be rubbed with violets and oil of violets and rose oil, and drink a kind of mixture of vinegar and honey. So we have these kinds of a variety of different treatments. And when it comes to thinking about the medieval garden and how accessible some of these would be, I mean, clearly some of them were expensive spices, cassia bark, cloves, things that you wouldn't be in your everyday garden. But then you have traditional crops like beans, barley, wheat, often used as flowers. Fats and oils tend to be animal or crop based. You have fruits and tree bark, which you might find in gardens. And then common herbs, garden herbs, particularly sage, mint, lovage, chamomile, dill, rosemary, and common flowers as well, violets, daisies, roses, and tansy. Opium poppies as well, interestingly, pop up in the Trotula. But there's a wonderful translation by Monica Green if you get the chance to have a look at it. We also have these fantastic herbals, which were like the Tractatus de Herbis, which also kind of depict the visual aspect of a herb or flower and give big long descriptions of their qualities. And here we've got some treatments for women in terms of suffocation of the womb, the idea that the womb could travel around the body and cause problems for other organs. So you should use ambergris for that. But Artemisia should be used for administered to menstruating and pregnant women. So this is wormwood that was mentioned in the previous one. Interestingly, it turns out that it's also the basis for absinthe, hence the Latin name Artemisia absinthium. So clearly you were supposed to have absinthe if you were pregnant or menstruating. Now, we've come on quite a circuitous route to our medieval gardens, but I did want to emphasise that medieval gardens weren't just about the physical space and place where people were growing their herbs for healthcare or for other things. It could also have a spiritual dimension and metaphorical dimensions as well. So, of course, we have spiritual connections with the Garden of Eden, with Paradise, with Eve's story as well. There's also the notion of the Hortus Conclusus, which is the medieval walled garden as a symbol of women's enclosure and virginity. And there's quite a historical debate about this, as whether this is something that's confining women or whether this is actually an empowering kind of female-only space, so and protected space. So it's quite an interesting way of thinking about it. Of course, gardens were used for pleasure and entertainment. Certainly, we see gardens in castle gardens as being a kind of perhaps a feminised space within a fortification, and again there seems to be debate over whether this is something that's a positive for women or a negative, and part of this is because the gardens are so often used as literary allegories as well. I mean, the most famous one, of course, is the Romance of the Rose, which is a big allegorical tale all based around the garden, about vices and virtues, and it is reasonably misogynistic. Christine de Pizan was not very impressed with that one. But I think so there's lots of different ways that we can conceive of the garden. And I think monastic and abbey gardens, these two were kind of quite spiritual as well as practical places that might be used for healthcare. To wrap up then, I just wanted to show another example of a female authored and compiled work which really, takes this metaphor of the garden and uses it in a very highbrow theological sense. So this is the Hortus Deliciarum, or the Garden of Delights, created by Abbess Herad of Hohenberg, who was abbess in the late 12th century in Alsace. The original was an incredibly beautiful text, but sadly it was destroyed by fire in the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. But we do have, from a reproduction, they've been able to sort of develop this reproduction. It's not nearly as lavish as the original, but it was a beautiful piece. It contained a history of the world from creation. It contained the most up-to-date theology, law, music, cosmology, and it was an educational tool for the nuns. But she also saw the nuns themselves as the flowers in the garden, and they all have little individual portraits here, which is really lovely. And we have them being described, "O snow white flowers, giving forth the scent of virtue, always resting in divine contemplation, hasten to heaven." Okay, that's it from me. I really hope you've enjoyed the talk. I just wanted to flag up some events that we have coming up. We've got the Historical Association Conference, Chalk Valley History Festival. We're doing some CPD days at Bristol Red Maids and Nottingham Trent University again. And of course, the SHP conference in July, which I'll be delighted to speak at. And we're really happy for people who are interested in developing modules or want to include more women but don't quite know how, to get in touch. And you can get in touch through our project website, where we've got lots of nice free materials as well. So thank you very much, and I'll look forward to catching you in the Q&A. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you so much, Natasha. And I'm actually delighted now that we can have Natasha with us live. So if anyone has any questions for her, I'm going to bring her up onto stage right now. She is beaming in direct from Spain. Welcome,
can you hear me okay?
Natasha. Yes, 100%. 100%.
Yeah, I'm literally right now, I'm in Burgos in Spain. I'm sitting opposite the most amazing medieval cathedral, like out of my window, where El Cid is buried. El Cid is right there. That's very exciting. But that's a story.
Absolutely. But so first of all, I mean, thank you so much for all of that recordings. Some really fascinating stuff. I have to say, I am a classic victim of icono misdiagnosis, and I'm sure there are hundreds of teachers of the history of medicine who are using that same image that you posted up, which is in all the textbooks, and had no idea that that was just kind of ripped off some kind of Bible and doesn't have anything to do with the plague, which is what the Great Black Death, which is what we would teach.
Yeah, it's one of the issues with, especially sort of perhaps in the earlier days of the internet, and people were just kind of taking manuscript images and popping them online or putting them in Wikipedia without properly referencing them or saying where they come from. They end up just kind of being, they're divorced from their context, and they end up just being used as whatever. But you do sort of see that picture and think, oh, that must be buboes. It's clearly a bubonic plague, But you don't know that for sure, And actually, this wasn't. So that there are very few depictions of people with the bubonic plague from the time of the Black Death. Like, there don't seem to be very many at all. Like, it's quite hard to. So I'm aware of maybe 2 or 3 images that depict it, but they tend to be, long after the date. I mean, everybody was busy at the time, sort of trying to survive.
For sure,
busy painting, but I think, so that there are very few actually visual depictions of it, which makes it more tricky, of course, then for the identification. But I would definitely, like, Monica Green is definitely kind of the go-to person for anything Black Death related. And
Good to know.
she was the one who kind of first flagged up that image as well.
Now, we do actually have a question for you.
Oh, okay.
And just by perfect coincidence, or maybe even planning, it is one of our co-guests on the show.
Ooh,
I'm going to bring Paula up onto the stage here with us. So this is Paula. Paula, do you want to,
hi, Natasha. Hi, Dan. Yes, great presentation. I actually saw and really enjoyed Medieval Women at British Library.
Oh, fantastic.
Took copious notes, but sadly I hadn't missed Unearthed. My question I put into the comments was, within your sources, did you find, or just generally in your research, have you found examples of Caribbean, African and or indigenous American plant knowledge used as medicine?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, it's a bit after my time period. So when I kind of get up to about the 15th century, like very, like that's pushing the boundary, and then beyond. So I haven't looked into it personally, but I think that there is obviously a really great wealth. You know, that's the Tractatus de Herbis that I showed, that image where you have these kind of, I guess there's a tradition of, you know, writing down knowledge about certain plants and drawing pictures of them. And I think, you know, that there was quite a concerted effort in the 16th century to try and document plants and potentially also their medicinal uses, as kind of there was expansion into these new areas. But obviously, with all of the dangers of of trying to interpret, very colonial sources when they're talking about indigenous knowledge. The person who would be better placed to answer this question possibly actually is my colleague Amy Fuller, who works on pre-Columbian America. But I could definitely ask her if she's aware of anything and drop you a line.
Amy Fuller, right, I've made a note.
Okay.
Brilliant. Good. Well, I think that may be the time we've got at the moment, but we've got some time which we'll come back to at the end of the session. I'm going to drop you both off back into the studio, and then I'm going to invite out Salma, who is going to talk about the work that she's done based on your collaborative work together, Natasha, with you.
Fantastic. I'm really excited to hear about this, yeah.
Right, and Paula, we'll see you in a little bit too towards the end of this session. Thank you. So I'm going to just drop you guys off, and I'm going to invite Salma up onto the stage. So Salma, thank you so much for joining us. Just tell us a little bit about you at the moment. Where are you teaching? How long have you been teaching history for? And then maybe like how you got connected with Natasha.
Hi. Yeah, my name is Salma Ishak. I currently work at Regent High School, so not too far from the British Library. So we are constant visitors over there. The way we got connected, actually, initially I went to one of her teaching medieval CPDs at one of the private schools up in North London, and I just started to follow her along since then. And once they did the CPDs at the British Library, I was just almost there for the medieval women one, and then me and Debbie kind of hooked up a little bit, and we just kind of kept linking up and deciding to work together, because our students were really excited, and I think they gave quite a lot of feedback, which made me quite proud. So I think that's how we kind of connected, and hopefully we can continue working on in the future as well.
Brilliant. And like as Debbie said in the introduction, this synergy, this kind of co-creation, these very exciting dynamic projects which come out of these little kind of exciting little nuggets of things which connect with each other. And now here we are talking live to the world just to share some of these kind of outcomes, which is fantastic. So I'm going to stop now. I'm going to just pass over to you. I'll pull up your presentation onto the screen, and then you've got about 10 minutes or so just to kind of share some of the resources you've been working on. So I'm going to disappear now.
Okay, hello everyone. Again, just to reiterate, my name is Salma Ishaq and I am the head of history at Regent High School. So in general, when we teach medieval women, our classrooms are often dominated by the great men of medicine. So we've got Hippocrates, we've got Galen, and we've got the overshadowing influence of the medieval church. So if women appear at all, they're often relegated to the peripheral figure of wise women in the village, or usually associated only with herbal medicine. Today, I kind of wanted to show how we can peel back the specification to find space for a more nuanced outlook on women as medical providers and patients, specifically by focusing on care within the community and the home. Now, I did a little bit of digging and I actually wanted to see what the specifications said during the medieval period and the Renaissance. I wanted to give them a bit of give on women. And why I, for the longest time, thought wise women was actually mentioned in the specification, but they are not. The only thing that you can see from my PowerPoint is care within the community and home, including the use of herbal remedies. And that, I think, a lot of us use as a way to get women in there. And the only time we have named women is until we get to the industrial period, and that is Florence Nightingale. So the Edexcel specification was very helpful in showing that there is absolutely no named women in the medieval and the Renaissance period. However, instead of tacking on a separate lesson about women, I found it much more effective to weave these sources directly into existing lessons. So what changed? My visit to the Medieval Women in Her Own Words series, they really inspired me and showed me the different ways that women affected history, not just with medicine, but also with religion and power and authority. But the medicine section really stuck out to me because that is what we are teaching our students in medieval medicine. And I wanted to find a way of how could we be more effective in weaving in women's stories in a way that is subtle, but also gives students an understanding that women have always been there. So I start by giving students 2 visual sources without any labels. I ask them 3 simple questions. What is it? What is it? What does it tell us about medical knowledge? And what does it tell us about women's status? So initially, students are not giving the full information. I just wanted to see what they understood from the sources without any knowledge, just really giving them an opportunity to live with that source. So our first source is from the Welcome Apocalypse, which Natasha just talked about. It's a manuscript from the 1420s, the drawing known as The Diseased Women, which was a real goldmine for our classroom. It shows a pregnant woman in a squatting position, a standard pose for the time. While it does highlight reproductive health, it also shows general labels for general ailments, and it also marks common areas for bloodletting, which ties really well into the medical treatment section. Historian Monica Green also suggests, based on the label, that the book might have belonged to the church official to teach midwives. Now, this almost immediately elevates women from marginal figures to people receiving and potentially providing care supported by the highest level of the literate medical establishment. So again, we're bringing the biggest establishment in the medieval period, which is the church, and women, and showing how they are quite respected in some instances. The second source, which was a crowd pleaser for our students, was the birthing girdle. So the long parchment scroll, as you can see on the slide, was designed to be wrapped around a woman during labor to provide comfort and protection. It did take my students a long time to try and figure out what this source was for. A lot of them thought it was just an elaborate piece of document, which a lot of women might have just used. They did not realize it was actually used to wrap around. Eventually, after a couple of questionings, a lot of students started to understand, oh, this was actually used during the birthing process. Now, this source I actually found really, really interesting because it bridged the religious and the supernatural beliefs. I find that our students struggle with understanding why the church would allow medieval people to still follow supernatural beliefs, but the fact that this bridges the gap really highlighted to our students that prayer and superstition actually worked hand in hand. And if you looked really closely to the image, you would see the wound of Christ a little bit and how it was rubbed away, showcasing that women were really using this as a sign of comfort and religious belief, but as well superstition, something to help them feel relief from the pain. Students then realized this wasn't just superstition, it was specialized medical tool. One student even compared it to psychological comfort or therapy. So I really liked, again, this is a top set class that I tried this with, but I really liked that some students were able to bring those two together. So what was the impact? Sorry, before I move on. Again, summing up with both sources, I liked that I was able to link to the 4 humors, which again is in the specification, the religious belief and supernatural beliefs in a way that textbook does not explicitly teach. And again, it does not relegate women to just using herbs. And again, there's nothing wrong with the herbs, but I think it is very easy to just push women into that corner when instead these 2 sources show that women were actually being taught how to become midwives. So what was the impact? A couple of quotes from my students. One, I didn't realize they had their own specialized tools like the girdle. And another one, it made the Middle Ages feel less stupid. Again, that's their words, not mine. I'm a medievalist. The medieval people are not stupid. The girdle was like a psychological comfort, etc. So again, what was the impact? Students found it simple to weave. It was simpler to weave in sources to existing lessons rather than tacking on a women in medicine. Accessibility, as a visual medium, the sources were highly accessible to all learners. It challenged misconception, it grounded supernatural beliefs in a religious way, and it helped plug the representation gap in a medieval section that is predominantly male. Students stopped seeing medieval medicine as just primitive, but they began to see them as a more complex social hierarchy of care and not just wise women with herbs. But yes, if you have any questions for me at all, I'm more than happy to help answer that. And if you need any of my slides, I'm more than happy to send that along as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Salma. And again, it just seems very clear how you just explained how well your students connected with this work compared to maybe some of the other elements of the course. Would you say that that was like they found this particular connection that they could make?
Yes, they did actually, which was quite heartening as a teacher, seeing that they were able to draw from different elements, which showed me that really placing this after they had learned about bloodletting, after they'd learned about all the different treatments and the church, they were able to see those connections and those synoptic links. So it really shows me that we can include more women in the medieval period, but it's also just knowing when to place them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, fingers crossed. I'm not 100% confident that we're going to get this outcome, but with the curriculum review, we would be expecting certainly a much more kind of integrated, much more diverse histories, kind of especially coming onto the GCSE specifications.
I would hope so.
I would hope so. I'm talking to the Department for Education on Thursday, so I will certainly kind of push that forward on our behalf. Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you so much for your contribution, Salma. We again might have time at the end of the session. We do have one comment which is coming from one of our viewers. Salma, 100% agree, weaving women in wherever possible rather than standalone lessons is the way forward. So props to you guys for kind of leading the way, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of those resources far and wide after today. Thank you so much, Salma. I'm going to drop you off now, if that's all right. And I'm going to bring on our next presenter. This is a very different look at the connection between gardening and the world of medicine. And I'm going to introduce Katrina, who's going to come and share her presentation. I'm going to bring Katrina up onto the stage. And so, Katrina, maybe you could just kind of quickly introduce yourself and kind of tell us how you got into this field of work in particular.
Okay, so my name is Katrina. I was a primary school teacher for about 15 years. And then around 2017, 2018, I moved into higher education. So I'm a lecturer in history pedagogy in Dublin City University, which is in Dublin in Ireland. So originally, this kind of work was kind of influenced by we were trying to be more inclusive in terms of like traditional, or in terms of incorporating Irish traveller culture into our curriculum in DCU. So one of the things that is very strong still in the Irish traveller community is traditional medical knowledge, like particularly herbs and so on. So I worked with members of the travelling community, and we put together some resources, and it kind of sprang from that, I suppose. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, without further ado, let's get into your presentation. You can share some of these incredible Aura archives, or the archive material that you've worked on. So I'm going to bring that up onto the stage now. Where are we? There we go. And over to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so today I'd like to explore how traditional knowledge, particularly traditional medical knowledge, can open up some learning opportunities in our classrooms. And it's not sort of about replacing modern science or medicine. It's more about helping students to understand how people in the past made sense of the world around them, how they used local plants to heal, and how their health was very much tied to the land. And I think this is really important, especially at the moment when young people feel kind of disconnected from nature. So revisiting older knowledge systems, traditional knowledge systems, can help us explore things like ecological awareness, historical thinking, and an appreciation of cultural heritage. So in this session, I'll very quickly, briefly, hopefully, share some ideas about how these digital archives and inquiry-based learning can work together to kind of make that happen. So move on. So when we're talking about traditional knowledge, it's sometimes referred to as indigenous knowledge or local knowledge or folk knowledge. And it's that accumulated body of knowledge and skills and practices that have been developed by communities over generations and generations. And it's deeply contextual, it's place-based, and it reflects a worldview in which humans are not seen as separate from nature, but rather we're a part of it. So this knowledge was built on long-term observations and lived experiences, and it was often transmitted through orally, through stories, through songs, through rituals and everyday practices. And it relates to areas such as agriculture, medicine, and even looking after the land. So unlike many modern knowledge systems, traditional knowledge doesn't divide the world up into categories. Instead, everything is interconnected. So in recent years, traditional knowledge has gained recognition for its role in addressing global challenges such as biodiversity loss and climate adaptation. But even though this is happening, it still remains kind of marginalized in many formal educational systems, which tend to privilege Western scientific traditions. So one entry point into this kind of conversation is traditional medical knowledge, so the use of healing plants and natural remedies. And for generations, communities relied on the land as their pharmacy, and they learned through observations which plants could treat wounds or fevers or whatever was the ailment. So this was built from that close relationship with the land, with the ecosystem, and it was about balancing people, plants, and the planet. So, and that included like sustainable harvesting, only taking what was needed to ensure that these medicines would continue to grow. And to some degree, a lot of this knowledge has faded, but I think we can do a lot to kind of get students to make connections between the world around them and healthier lifestyles. So to kind of understand why this matters, we must think about our disconnection, our growing disconnection from nature and the natural world. That's as a result of quite a number of things, like increasing urbanization, more people living in cities, people being further away from undeveloped natural spaces, and even, you know, increased screen time, fewer opportunities for unstructured outdoor play with children, and so on. So one offshoot of this disconnection is in nature, it's known as plant blindness. And this refers to kind of a cognitive bias in which people kind of overlook plants in their environment and undervalue their importance. And studies have shown that students are much better at identifying animal species or plants than plant species. And the cure for plant blindness is actually quite simple. It's around naming. So once you know the name of a plant, it stops just being a green thing and starts being an individual with its own story. So in this session, we'll very quickly explore some features of healing plants using interviews that were collected by school children in Ireland in the 1930s. But first, let's find out what you already know about healing plants and their cures. So you don't need to answer these, but just have a think. So can you name that plant, and can you think how it might have been used in the past? Some of them are very familiar to us and some of them maybe not so much. So just have a think as I go through these. Slides are coming up already, actually. So
I think what's happened is that when we've saved the presentation, the animation hasn't come through. So we've given the answers.
Okay, so this is dandelion, and according to some cures, it's used for kidney infection. This one here is echinacea for colds and flu. This one, lavender, for a good night's sleep. This one, calendula, for cuts and rashes. People are coming in with some as well. This one, chamomile, for stomach aches, and they're used for other purposes as well. So it was just to kind of show you that sometimes we even adults can have difficulties around naming plants as well. So how do we find out about these plants and how they were used in the past? Well, one way is to look at digitized archives, because they allow students to encounter the past directly and see it as not as a finished story, but as a lived experience. So one of the digitized archives in Ireland is called the School's Folklore Collection, and it's basically stories that were collected by primary school children between 1937 and 1939, and over 50,000 children collected stories, cures, traditions, recipes from older members of their community. Some of those people were in their 80s, so you're getting a lot of traditional knowledge there. And the stories were brought back into the schools, and the teachers sent them into the folklore archives, where they are now digitized and available. And there's lots of different topics that you can look at. So I suppose when we're looking at something, like in this case, we're looking at traditional medical knowledge, but when we're looking at these, there's a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. Like, so as David Lowenthal always reminds us, the past is a foreign country. So that foreignness can be difficult for students, and I think it was mentioned in a couple of the other presentations. So people in the past operated within very different worldviews, and we need to acknowledge that, and we need to avoid kind of imposing modern assumptions on earlier societies. So we need to introduce that to students, because without the context and understanding that, they can fall into presentist interpretations and this idea that people in the past were not as clever as we are today. And that's really important when it comes to traditional medical knowledge, because the practices were shaped by belief systems that are very different from today. So in terms of Irish traditional medical knowledge, and this applies to lots of other places as well, it's a combination of Druidic, pre-Christian and Catholic faith influences, using things like sacred places, folk medicine, prayers, charms, religious symbols, saints. And they come from a time when there wasn't as deep an understanding of the working of the human body, and many illnesses were kind of attributed to the supernatural, particularly the Dini Mahu in Irish, which is the good people or the fairies. So sick children and changelings, fairy substitutes, disappearances, or the evil eye, things like that. So we need to have children aware of these things. So, and a couple of other things as well. Like, so one method of protection was to use magic, and you can see that in some of the the traditional medical files that we'll be looking at in a minute. There was also this belief that you could transfer a sickness from an object to, from yourself to an object or to another person, and also prevention techniques. So rituals around different things, like in placing flowers around the house and May Day and so on. It's important that children or students understand these cultural and religious contexts so that they can appreciate these practices on their own terms rather than judging them by modern standards. So I'm sure you want to see what the collection looks like. So this is an example of one of the pages from the Dukas collection, and as you can see, they're handwritten by the children. Really lovely handwriting. It always amazes children when we work with them. But there's also transcriptions there as well. So and as you can see here, we've got goose grease to cure a chest infection. We've got heartburn and bread soda, stomach ache with boiling milk, whooping cough was to cough on the frog or on a can of, and a frog was in the can of water. So that was an example of transference. And if you look here, there's another example of transference to cure warts. You rub a snail on the wart and then you pierce the snail with the thorn, and then stick it on a bush. And when it dies, then your wart is gone. And then so a lot of these cures had, they might sound kind of strange to people now, but in fact, there was a lot of scientific basis for it emerged later that there was a lot of scientific basis for them in some ways. And then we've got some more here. And how do we get children to engage with them? And this is an example of an inquiry frame that can help them work through these archival materials. So as you can see, this allows them to identify the various cures, to think about if these are still used today. Like one of the ones that children are very familiar with is the cure for a nettle sting. We still use that today, or even bread soda with heartburn and stuff like that. And it also allows them to think about the type of cure. Is it magic? Is it religious? Is it transference? Is it mineral-based or herb-based? Then I often take them outside. Then we download this app to their tablets or phones. We go outside to identify plants in the locality. So this is the app that I use. It's called Seek, and it's a child-friendly, gamified kind of nature app that uses image recognition to identify plants and wildlife in real time, and then they can research those plants themselves. Are they in the Dukas collection, or can they find other activity or other information about them? So then the next thing is, sorry, I wanted to show you an example, to give you an example from that I developed a couple of years ago for a website called Historiana. So it's Historiana is an online learning platform designed by Euroclio to provide history educators with free, high quality resources. And it's got thousands of historical sources and ready-to-use activities that are based on this idea of historical inquiry, critical thinking, and you can actually develop your own e-activity builder lessons to create your own ones yourself. So I did provide a link to yeah, there it is there, or a QR code if you want to have a look at the activity that I developed. I'll just very quickly talk you through it. So my inquiry question here is, what can we learn from traditional medical knowledge? So students begin by exploring how traditional cultures and use plants for healing and how these reflected holistic worldviews. Then they engage in a simple plant identification task, sorting photographs into plants I know, plants I don't know. And then the next activity asks them to think about how might have these plants have been used in the past. So they match up cures with the plants themselves. So this kind of gets across this idea that, you know, we need to know more about our local biodiversity, and it helps counteract that plant blindness as well. Then the next stage, then they analyze excerpts from the school's folklore collection that I just showed you, and they use annotation tools to look for patterns, to sort the different cures out, herbal remedies, religious aspects, ritual practices, so that they're beginning to see that history is constructed from fragments, and that this evidence needs to be interpreted. And then we go back to the idea of the archive itself. Who collected these stories? Why were they collected in the 1930s? What was preserved? What doesn't get preserved? And they begin to see that archives themselves are curated, and that historical knowledge in the archives is shaped by selection. And then we look at their own communities, so they can can go through the process of conducting their own oral history and interviews with family or community members about traditional memory remedies that they have. And in doing that, they can create their own mini archive and experience how historical knowledge is gathered. And then finally, I get them to design a herbal first aid kit for their school, selecting remedies based on research and explaining their historical uses. So that activity kind of brings it all together to synthesize their learning, to make those connections between past and present. So there are just some ideas on how we can integrate the study of plants and their healing properties into history education, how to engage children in a deeper understanding of the world around them, making connections with the ingenuity and the resilience of past cultures, and an appreciation of the interconnectedness of the human world and the natural environment. And that's it. Thank you.
I mean, that was absolutely wonderful. A tour de force. I mean, there was so much stuff going on in there. Just very quickly, what was the age that was pitched at those lessons?
I have used it with 9, 10, 11-year-olds. I've used it with secondary school students, and I've also used it with student teachers who are training to be primary school teachers.
Yeah, I mean, you can see definitely just the way that sequence of activities were planned. It could be kind of pitched up, pitched down. It was very, very accessible to like a wide range of students. And I think for me, as someone who's kind of studied a lot of kind of Indigenous histories, I'm particularly teaching some kind of American Indigenous histories and seeing the connections that you're making there as well. And then the next person who's going to be talking as well is going to be looking at the kind of Black African, Black Caribbean, Black British experience as well. So much crossover as well with kind of Indigenous approaches, traditional approaches to medicine as well. And again, just getting that into the classrooms is A, incredibly important, B, extremely inspiring, absolutely fascinating, different lens to kind of view some of those kind of common areas, those connections, which, you know, is so central to us and our students having meaning from the past. You know, that's how we kind of draw that meaning. So thank you so much, Katrina. Really appreciate it. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time right at the end if people want to have some questions as well. I'm going to drop you off the stage now with a clang, and I'm going to bring up Paula. I'm just going to take down Katrina's presentation, if I can find it. There we go. Hi, Paula.
Hi, hello everybody.
I'm sure you're going to, again, find some connections with what Katrina was just talking about. But I'm going to go straight over to your presentation so you've got some time just to kind of share some of your work with us.
Sure, fantastic. Thank you so much. Yes, I was particularly interested in what Catriona was saying because there was a lot of crossover. I used to be a teacher of English, actually, but I read history, and I've taught primary, Key Stage 3 and secondary, and I now work with universities. The project that I'm working on is really looking at our shared histories, looking at the African Caribbean contribution to Britain from Roman times onwards. I will skip through the slides about my background because there's not a lot of time about that, apart from to say that my first funders was my first school, Haberdashers, an ancient livery company. I am in the process of developing a new plant knowledge tapestry, essentially, and I'm going to skip through these because we haven't got a lot of time to really delve into the background of my project. But these are woven tapestries that are co-created with different communities. It's a sort of like touring tapestries. There are lots of reasons why I've chosen tapestry as a medium. It's a metaphor for the connections between us. It's really about showing there's more that unites us than divides us. They're also just on its own very interesting histories around how textiles have been developed. It's cross-cultural, obviously with weaving, and it's an ancient practice, but with modern techniques. It's really allowed for a more democratic way of creating these tapestries that were once only created by the rich to tell a very particular story. And you could say that's how history has been told. Historically, only certain people had access to tell those stories, but now, we're having a more inclusive, truthful histories. So I have been working with a number of children already around England primarily, and would like to certainly broaden this out to include Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. Just recently, I did some work at the Black Cultural Archives where they had been looking at plant knowledge around Rastafarian communities. They had been looking at health service workers, and I had been doing a little bit of research into Indigenous and African and Caribbean plant knowledge that was then catalogued by Hans Sloane. And as you know, that's the basis of some of the big collections at the National History Museum. But that those, the things that he observed in Jamaica, etc., he didn't attribute where some of that knowledge and information came from. So there was sort of a disconnect between our understanding of who had the knowledge. And it's, whilst we can't name all the people, this project is about delving into some of that knowledge and where it came from, and naming what we can name. So I'm at the beginning stages of planning for this tapestry and gathering partners. And for me, it's really important that for any new tapestry that I'm thinking about, how can I make this appealing to children? How does it fit with the curriculum? Thinking about resources, because sometimes I am there leading these workshops myself. And, I need to be sort of thinking how do I connect to the curriculum? How do I make it interesting? So the resource that was just shared with that inquiry-based learning grid was very useful. Those are the sorts of things, activities that I think would be really great to use. The workshop that I just led recently was it was sort of I was working with somebody who'd been looking at the archives of different herbalists. And I had brought together photographs and mixed media, and the people in the workshop were then able to use the information to creatively create some of the collages that you see. So on the left-hand side, we have Mary Seacole, who was known to cure soldiers, but she's not necessarily seen as somebody who was using herbal remedies, but she was. So we were looking at her, and we're also looking at Nanny of the Maroons, who is not necessarily regarded as a herbalist, but some of the sort of magical things that she was said to do that has directly come from plant knowledge. And I've just got an example of some embroidery, because it's just a lovely technique that most people had never tried before. And just as people really enjoyed this sort of hands-on making that was based on archival research. So at the moment, I'm literally just compiling what should be in the research brief for the artist, who is then going to go on to create this new tapestry. So there's, I don't know if any of you have heard of the work of Akosia Paris Osai. She has been doing a lot of work at the National History Museum. I actually just had a meeting today with the Chelsea Physic Garden as well about their own collection. There's a lot of really, really good information out there. And Bath Abbey is partnering with me so we can co-create this new tapestry together and seek new partners. So, I'm sort of thinking, oh, well, there could be a school out there, or there could be another academic who could help support in the development of this new tapestry that would then be a great learning resource for schools, because the tapestries tour, but also they'll be available online. So do please have a ponder if that could be of interest. The tapestries that I've already created, World War II, African Romans, and a Yoruba creation story, are currently at the Craft Study Centre till the 23rd of May. And I've just put my Instagram QR code with a bit more information and some more visuals. And the best place to reach me is on LinkedIn or via Dan. So yes, early days on this.
I mean, thank you again so much for sharing. What I just see is just such a brilliant form of representation, just like the way in which, as you described, like the weaving process is very, very tactile, very kind of historic, very kind of creative and kind of dynamic way of bringing this history into kind of the present day, very kind of live kind of history, and very kind of beautifully designed as well. So thank you for sharing that. Let's give a plug as well for what we are planning for the SHP Summer Conference in July, because Paula is going to have some time dedicated at the conference to invite people who are going to join us in Leeds to spend some time with her, creating their own embroidery, sharing some of their ideas and reflections on the work that they've been doing and the work in the conference. So if you want to meet Paula live and direct and spend some time getting to kind of know her and her work, connect to some of the stuff which we've talked about today, I'm sure will be exhibited as well in Leeds. So thank you so much, Paula. Really appreciate your time. I'm going to drop you off. Well, actually, no, I won't drop you off. I'm going to bring everyone up onto the stage because we've got just a few comments I just want to share with everyone, and then we'll wrap up for the session. I'm going to just take off this screen here. I'm going to pick people up onto the stage. Got Barbara there, Katrina, thank you very much. I just wanted to share a couple of comments which have gone up. First of all, Tessa saying how brilliant everything that she's been seeing as well. Alison Kitson, who's a teacher trainer at the Institute of Education, and also a very important part of the sustainability and climate community, talking about how she loved this idea of the herbal first aid kit. It's a genius way of kind of getting students to kind of connect with that work. And this idea of the land as our pharmacy, which I think is, again, such a powerful phrase, which was stretched all the way back to medieval times and way beyond that as well, the land as our pharmacy. And again, just think about amazing ways to kind of connect our young people to the natural world, getting outside, plant hunting, etc., etc. So I think we will wrap it up there. Can I just say a massive thank you to everyone for your time for this presentation, these webinars. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, then direct them to me, and you'll get my email address, b.lindencohen@leedstennessee.ac.uk, and I will share those questions with our co-presenters here, or through the kind of way we distribute stuff after this conference. Thank you so much, Kat. We're just finishing off. Kat Hates Paradoxes has joined us. She said, fab talks. And so what a good way to wrap up with that. So thank you very much, everyone. Really appreciate it. I'm going to end our presentation now. Cheerio.
Thanks, bye.